Hey everyone, so today I'm going to be walking through extending the core columns block within WordPress, and we're going to add an extra collapse control, the stack on tablet, which will let us do some cool multi-breakpoint responsive layouts. So we'll be able to kind of toggle this on and off, and we can nest columns with different breakpoints enabled and do things like this 4-2-1 grid where it collapses multiple times. And we can do a bunch more more complex responsive layouts than would be possible with just the core columns block itself. All right, so let's jump into it. Right now I'm in the plugins directory for just a local development site I have. I'm using local by Flywheel, but you can use whatever you want. Go ahead and create a directory for the plugin. Jump in there and let's make a index.php file. And we'll just go ahead and open this up in the editor. All right, let me bump this size up so that it's actually visible here. And let's jump into PHP. We don't need that closing tag. And so what I'm going to be doing is dropping code in. I actually have a write-up for this on my blog, which I'll put a link in the description. I'm just kind of going to be dropping code in and explaining it as I go. So first up, this is just the standard WordPress plugin descriptors. You don't need all of these, and you can obviously customize them however you want. You do need a plugin name. So then best practice to protect your plugin file from direct access. This is one of the common ways of doing it. Basically, WordPress will define this. If it's not defined, we just exit out. So this is kind of our plugin boilerplate. So now let's go ahead and set up our source files. For this, we're going to need a couple of things. So let's create our source directory, and then I'm going to split it up into JS. And then we'll also have a CSS folder. So in here, we'll have a style.scss. We're going to write our styles for our tablet breakpoint in here. And in the JS, I'm going to call this editor.js because this will be where we make our component that creates that little extra toggle. So those are set up. First thing I think I'll do, I'll add some quick, just add a quick hello from editor. So we know if that's running, we can check that later. For the style, I am going to steal styles from WordPress itself. So I just wanted to show, essentially, if we look at the columns block, this is just a vanilla install of the Frost theme. And if we look at what the columns block is doing, when it has this is layout flex, that's what causes it to collapse. And you can see basically, let's look here. It has this flex wrap important on it. And then let's see. I believe, yep, down here. So the other big part of this is this flex basis 100%. So that gets added below a certain breakpoint, and basically they spread to 100%, wrap on top of each other. If you had the collapse on mobile turned off, they would not have the display flex, and they would not have this flex basis, and it would just squeeze like a standard kind of flex container. So what we'll do is we will steal that for our own breakpoint. So I'm just going to drop this in here. In a real plugin, you probably would handle this in some kind of dynamic way. Maybe you would have a field, maybe you would have a setting on the back end. We're just going to define 1,000 pixels because that's not really the point of this. We really want to get into extending the UI. So basically we're going to say 1,000 is our tablet breakpoint. Below that, we're going to turn on those same styles, wrap and flex basis 100%. They do need to be important because they are overriding some other high specificity classes. So then what we need to do is actually set up this build process for our plugin. So let's get started on that. So we're gonna just go, yep, npm init, and then the packages that we're getting, I actually got this from another blog on extending blocks. I'll link that in the description as well. It's a great article, and I'm using the same kind of compilation config from that article. There's not a whole lot to it. WordPress scripts does so much for you. So we're installing it, and then just webpack remove empty scripts and path are 3 packages. So I'll let that install, and then I'll get ready to drop in. Well, let's just, while that's installing, make a webpack.config.js. So we basically want to configure WordPress scripts a little bit ourselves. First up, we're just going to import the default config and then our 2 extra packages here. And then how this works is basically you can set a module exports, and you always want to spread the default config so that it inherits everything from WP scripts, but then you can customize it. So the most common one is this entry. And what you can do is basically on the key side here, you are giving it kind of where you want it to output. And then on the value side, you're pointing it to the source. And that'll make more sense once we run this. So basically I'm saying, grab editor.js and put it into build/js/editor. And same with the CSS. So you'll see that once we run it. Plugin, same thing. Don't forget, whenever you go a layer in, you just want to spread the whatever is there by default. And then all this plugin does is it just, since we're directly compiling this as CSS, Webpack would generate a JS file, and this just gets rid of it just so it's a little cleaner. So there's that file. And now that everything is installed, let's add a couple of scripts here. So we'll do start. This will be WP scripts. Whoa. Start. Like that. And then we'll also have a build. We won't really need that one since this is just a demo, but there we go. And so now we are all good to go. So let's go ahead and just run npm run start. This is going to compile all our assets, and now that config file will make a little more sense. If I open it up again, you'll see I have this CSS, and then in there, I don't know why it always appends this dash style to the CSS files, so it's kind of funky. You get this style dash style. For the JS, it's a little more straightforward. It puts it in this JS folder and it calls it editor. So this is really nice for configuring your own compilation setups. So now that we've got all that going, our styles are actually in place. So we can go ahead and kind of test this if we grab our class here. Well, no, I lied. First, we have to actually enqueue these. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and kind of put the body of our plugin. I like to do this as a class. I know probably a lot of people hate that, but it just, for me, it makes sense and it keeps the namespace clean and I don't have to worry about conflicts. So yeah, I do it this way. I know a lot of people really hate this, so you can obviously do it in a functional way as well. But essentially I'll add a constructor function here, and I have IntelliSense on for PHP, and it is going to throw a bunch of errors, so let's turn that off. So first off, I'm just kind of making some utility things: base path, base URL, mapping it to the plugin directory. Then I'm grabbing these asset.php files because they have the dependency and version in them, so that's very useful. And then we're gonna hook into the enqueue. And actually, I think this is deprecated now. I think it's just enqueue block assets is what you're supposed to use. And then WP enqueue scripts for the front end. And then we'll just define both those functions. And in the editor, we'll actually enqueue the style and the JS. I'm enqueuing the style because I just kind of want to give a real-time preview in the editor of that tablet collapse point as well. You don't strictly need it. And then on the front end, obviously we just need the CSS since the JS is just for our component. So that should get us all the way there. And if we go ahead and look, let's do a quick test. So we can jump in to our plugins, activate that plugin. Then let's go to our posts. I created just kind of a sample post with a few columns. Let's grab, these are a couple nested columns, so I'm going to grab this set of columns. And what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to manually add in our class, because right now that class is already in there. So technically if we add it, we should go ahead and see that in action. So let's test it. Boom. Those columns collapse at 1,000, and then it collapsed to mobile. So at this point, a lot of people might actually go ahead and say, hey, we're good to go. We've got a little utility class. That's good enough. Now we can make our custom layouts. But let's go further and make it a nice little UI for our users. So to do that, we'll jump into editor.js. And so basically, this gets a little complex, so bear with me. I'm going to paste in some code that I'm not actually going to use, but this kind of shows the basic idea. So we've got this function add filter, and essentially what we're doing is, if you know React, it's a higher order component. So we call it with multi-breakpoint. That's just kind of a convention to name the higher order components prefixed with with. And it accepts this block edit, which is the actual block's kind of standard component, and then the props that go with that block. And basically this is filtering every single block in the editor. And so what we do is we can check. So we're checking, hey, what block is this that we're on right now? If it's the core.columns, we can add our custom control. Otherwise, we just return the block edit component as is with its standard props spread on it. So that's the basic idea. I'm going to ditch this and put in how we actually do it. So first off, we'll grab a whole bunch of dependencies. We'll go through these, but yeah, we'll go through one at a time. The filter is the important one that we just talked about. So let's go ahead. We've got this add filter, and then we've got this with multi-breakpoint. And first off, we'll grab our attributes and our class name out of the props. And basically, the reason we're using class names is it's just kind of the safest way to extend blocks, because you're not actually editing anything in the save function or anything like that. So if this plugin gets deactivated, there's not going to be a bunch of broken blocks or anything like that. Basically, you can deactivate the plugin and all it will do is it'll remove that UI control and the blocks will no longer collapse at that tablet breakpoint. But the class will still be there. So if you activate the plugin again, everything is restored and it's right back to the way it was. So that's why handling this stuff through class names makes a lot of sense. It's just safe. It's just kind of the most natural way to do it. And if you start editing the markup itself, there's a lot more chance for creating broken blocks for your users. So now that we've got this, let's throw in that return statement where we are checking. Oops, sorry, got lost there. We are checking if it's the columns block. If it is, we've got this inspector controls. Panel body is just add some padding, and then we've got a toggle control component. We've got the checked attribute, which is calling this is tablet collapse enabled, and then an on change, which is calling this toggle tablet collapse. We obviously don't have those, but let me drop these guys in here and explain what's going on. So the first one is tablet collapse enabled. Pretty simple. We're just looking at the class name and seeing if our utility class is there. So that determines whether it's checked. For this, we want to add or remove this class from the block. We could do, because the class is stored as a string, we could do like a class name dot split it into an array, filter it, things like that. But WordPress has this token list component, which is really useful. It just takes a string, and then basically when you convert it into a token list, you have add and remove methods that just will basically take this in and out. And then you can just call list.value to put it back into a string. So it's almost like a JavaScript set, but instead of taking an array, it is able to just directly interface with a class list string. So this is really handy. And that's how we're doing the add and remove logic without having to, do split and filter and what have you. So at this point, our basic logic is there. So let's save it and take a look in the editor and see what we've got. Edit post. We'll do these left columns. Boom, you've got a stack on tablet, and it's actually already enabled because we added that class. So you can toggle it on and off. And we can actually even see right here in the editor, if we bring it down to around there, let's say, and then we turn it on, boom, it'll stack. Turn it off, it won't. And under the hood, all it's doing is adding and removing that class. So again, this is like a really kind of safe, low overhead way to add functionality. So now this is basically our goal that we're trying to achieve. Now we can do some really cool layouts, but I do want to fix a couple, I suppose you could call them bugs. They're really just editor UI bugs. So check this out. This is kind of weird. It says it's not going to stack on mobile, it's going to stack on tablet. That's not really true, because stack on tablet overrides stack on mobile. So it is going to be stacked on everything below tablet. We could, change our media query, something like that, but I kind of like it cascading. That's how most, frameworks like Bootstrap or anything else, that's mobile first, but still the idea of kind of cascading makes a lot of sense. So instead, I'm going to kind of link these toggles together. So let's take a look at how to do that. Basically, we want to see how we can affect that collapse on mobile toggle. And so what I did is just console.log attributes on this component. And so basically now when I come in here, I'd refresh. And now we can kind of just debug this in the console. So you can see already we can kind of see what's going on. There's a is stacked on mobile attribute. It's set to true. Boom, it's set to false. So really quickly we can kind of see what's going on under the hood there and then base our solution on that. So what we want to do is when it is turned off on, let's see, when it is turned off, when mobile gets turned off, we want to turn off the tablet collapse as well. So that's actually pretty easy. We just need use effect. And we're listening to that is stacked on mobile. If it is false, then we just call our toggle function and pass in false to turn off the tablet collapse. We do need to import use effect as well, or else we'll get an error. So now that should be good. Let's reload real quick and see where we're at. Nice. So now that makes a lot of sense. You have them on, you turn off mobile, it turns off tablet too because it's cascading. We also want to go the other direction. If you turn on tablet by itself, that should turn on mobile because it's affecting them both. So this is actually even easier now that we know how this works under the hood. Under here, when we have our enable, we're adding that class. All we need to do is also do, let's see, what is it called? Is stacked on mobile. We need to set this to true. Boom, we can go in here and now we have fully linked controls. So they're intuitive, they make sense. You turn it off, they both go off. Turn it on, they both go on. But if you do it in the other order, you can do them individually. So now they really give you an idea of what's going on directly. Awesome. So at this point, really everything is there. It's working. There is one more thing that I guess I'll go ahead and handle just because I know it's there and it's going to bug me, but I think most people would never notice. When you insert the columns block, you get presented with these variants. You can see our stack on tablet control is there, but nothing else is. When you actually pick a variant and then go back to the columns block, everything else appears. I kind of feel like we should follow the trend of the other things. And so what I did, just to give some transparency of figuring this out, is I went to the actual columns block and I looked, and you can kind of see what's going on here. There's a placeholder component, which is where you pick the variation. And then there's the main component, which has all the like inspector controls with the is stacked on mobile. And then down here at the bottom, it's checking whether columns has inner blocks. And if it does, it'll show you the full component. If it doesn't, it shows you that placeholder. So basically, we just have to copy this logic, which is using useSelect, which basically looks at kind of the WordPress editor context. And then it's checking, using the ID of the columns block, it's checking, are there child blocks on this? And returning true if there are, false if there is not. So we will just copy this really more or less exactly into our block. So up here, we'll import useSelect, and we also need to import the store, and then shoot, yeah, let's do it under here. Well, you'll see this is exactly the same thing. We're just getting the client ID of the block. We're checking if it has child blocks. returning that as has inner blocks. And then we'll do the same thing down here. We're checking for the column name, but we'll just also check, hey, even if it's core columns, it also has to have inner blocks to display our custom component. So let's go back over here, reload. We add the columns block. It actually, now we're in the styles pane because there's nothing to show in the settings pane. So when we pick one, boom, now we've got our settings control. You can see before it just defaulted to this one since these are hidden until a variant is picked. So I feel like that just adds, another layer of polish. These are fully linked. It behaves just like the stack on mobile. And now we can do some cool stuff. You can see, so in here, I've got this kind of nested column layout where we've got two sets of two columns, and we could turn off, for instance, stack on mobile on each of those, but then on the outer columns, have it turned on. I guess I already turned it on there. And then when we update and check this out on the front end, we get this kind of nice double collapse action, the kind of 4-2-1 grid. And this is something that, I think is often something that editors are looking for, and it's really not easy to do with the core blocks currently. So just by adding this control, you can get a lot more leeway and start doing things like these, multi breakpoint grids. You could have, one big thing on the side, and then these blocks collapse, and then it all stacks on mobile. It just gives you a lot of options without adding a ton of busyness into the editor on the back end. A lot of the aftermarket kind of grid plugins have a billion controls here, and I like the minimal approach of the columns block, but sometimes you need a little extra, and this is kind of an elegant way to do it. So you could always add, another option for like reversing order, things like that. I wouldn't go too crazy because, again, the columns block is meant to be elegant and minimal, but this is a cool technique just to add a little more functionality.